So how this workshop is going to work is there's going to be 3 parts. Firstly, the workshop. I'm going to tell you some things about judging. What this won't be is like basics on judging, because I expect either you guys have judged before, so you know like how to do judging and the procedural things behind that. Taylor, shut the fuck up, bro. Right? But rather will just be some tips and tricks on how to get better. For those of you that haven't judged before, you've at least probably heard an oral adjudication, or at least have heard people talking about the deliberations, so hopefully most of it should be fine for you. Fantastic. So yeah, this is what we'll cover. So firstly, the basic principle, of which there are 5, so principles. Secondly, bad advice that other people will give you about judging, that I will tell you, don't listen to this advice, because it's bullshit advice. And common mistakes that judges make. Because notably, and I'll cover this in a second, a lot of judging is just avoiding making certain mistakes, as opposed to having certain things that you need to do well every time. And the reason for this is very obvious. Every debate is very different. You need to adjudicate differently in every debate. The third thing is on how to be an excellent panelist. And the reason I'm going to teach you guys this is it's quite, like, you have more of a capacity to be an excellent chair, because you can do things like OAs, you have other things like panel management. But as a panelist, the only thing you have to do is answer the chair's questions. So often it's really hard to stand out, be a diamond in the rough between panelists. And lastly, I'll talk about crediting principles and some tips on that. Cool. Firstly, what are some challenges of judging, and why are workshops on judging important? So the first thing which is really important is that there's no stock judging, and the reason for this is the thing that I said earlier, right? So notably, with speakers, there's a lot of stock that speakers just take in and they're able to regurgitate. And the reason for this is that themes in debates can be quite similar as they come across. Notably, with judging, you can't do this, because even if you can cross-apply themes from different debates, the persuasiveness of the claims that are made by certain debaters will be different based on the persuasiveness of the claims made by different debaters in different rooms, right? So even if it's a stock debate that you're adjudicating, you cannot be a stock adjudicator. That's a bad idea. Secondly, it's quite chair and panel dependent. So you'll be in different panels and have different chairs all the time, and your deliberations will therefore be run really differently. So this is another challenge that you have to contend with. The third thing is that speakers quite often are really bad, and this means they don't do things for you. So you have to do things like compare different metrics and things like that. Again, we'll talk about this. But often speakers being really bad and not doing your job for you makes judging really difficult. The fourth thing that's difficult is being really, really good or standing out as a judge. Because often debates are kind of bland and boring. It's quite difficult to really express yourself. The fifth thing is that often judges have competing intuitions, and this will become more obvious later when we talk about principles. And the last thing is that it's just you. And that is to say that when you're at a competition and you're judging, whereas when you're a speaker, you at least have your partner who you can rely on. Your partner is your rock, and you guys at least have each other for support. When you're an adjudicator, it's literally just you, and it's quite hard to source support from other people. Sometimes it can feel a little bit lonely. I'm not saying this should discourage you from judging. I'm just saying it's a challenge that people have to contend with. Hopefully, throughout the course of this, and making you a better adjudicator, all of these things can be helped out. Cool. Basic principle. So this is taken directly from the EUDC manual, which is that the way that teams win is by being persuasive within the burdens of the debate and within the rules of BP debating. And I know all of you should know this, and I know I said this is not a basics workshop, but even those of you that are really advanced at judging need to make sure you always keep this in mind when you're adjudicating. And this is my version of it, which is just teams win debates by providing more persuasive reasons to pass or fail the motion versus the other reasons that other teams give to pass or fail the motion. So notably, often in really advanced deliberations, you'll be there and panelists are yapping about some shit that doesn't matter, right? They're like, oh my god, this team does this so well. And they don't link it back to why it is a good or a bad idea to pass or fail the motion. Notably, they also don't talk about why it is persuasive, why does it meet the burdens of the motion, and they just talk about why it is better than the other teams in abstract. So notably, the best way to ground really complicated deliberations, or the best way to ground your judging, is make sure you always are remembering these things. Cool. The other principle is that everything is an argument. So I know often at a beginner level or a more intermediate level, we tell you guys different things that you can do in debating. Things like claims, rebuttal, weighing, analysis, etc. Fuck all of that, right? It's all an argument. Everything is an argument, right? Because an argument is making an argument. A rebuttal is making an argument that an argument is not the argument it's saying it is. Weighing is just an argument that something is important. Notably, if you perceive everything as an argument, it means you're as rigorous in assessing everything that happens in a debate. So just remember that everything is an argument, should be credited and should be discredited like an argument in the cases that you're looking at these things. Lastly, this is really long. You don't have to read all this. Again, this is just plugged directly from the EUDC manual. The main thing here is that panels are a team. So when you're on a panel, your aim is not to try and win deliberation. I know a lot of adjudicators will try and tell you, or a lot of people will try and tell you, like, did you win that delib? That's not the aim of the game. The aim of the game is to cooperatively and collaboratively come up with the best justification for a certain call that exists. Now, notably, this doesn't mean that you just coalesce whatever the rest of the panel says, or whatever the chair says. If you're unconvinced by them, that's a good thing. That means that you, as a team member on that panel, is adding more rigor to the extent to which that call is correct or incorrect. Splits are also reflective of how different calls are reflected. But notably, your aim isn't to try and win. Your aim isn't to try and make yourself successful on this panel, but rather to make the whole panel successful, so you guys can holistically deliver to teams what the adjudication is. So always just remember that you're a team, be cooperative. And this is like when judges always say, like, oh, be open-minded to other judges. This is what they mean. You guys are just trying to collaborate around the best possible outcome of the deliberation. Cool. That being said then, here's some bad advice you'll get and some common mistakes that judges make. Okay, the first thing, this is not directed towards anyone. Anyone that tells you to use a specific tracking method, don't listen to them, right? This is bullshit, right? So some people will be like, you track badly because you use this method. Use my method instead, where you use 5 different colors, and you use a laptop, and you have 2 different books, and things like that. Maybe that is the best thing for you, but notably, it might not also be the best thing for you. Here are some tips that might help you find your tracking method. The unfortunate thing here is I can't give you a foolproof tracking method because it will just be different for everyone. So think about, firstly, how you study and retain information, and secondly, why you're taking the notes in the first place. Because a lot of judges take notes just so they remember the information. They actually won't ever look at their notes ever again, but it's just so the information's in their brain for the deliberation and the oral adjudication. Some judges take notes so they can look back at them so they can recall those things within the first place. I often think that's more efficient. Once again, it's whatever will make you most efficient during deliberation. So, notably, if you look at my notes, they kind of just look like a chicken scratch. I'm not gonna lie, I write in the same color, I use 3 leaves of paper, I write on both sides, I write on pretty much every part of the piece of paper. I use weird shorthand things that don't make sense. Like if I do like double brackets, equal sign, that means the claim is symmetric. If it's single brackets and equal sign, that means another team said that the claim is symmetric, right? So like you will have your own versions of doing shorthands that are more intuitive to you. You'll have your own ways of doing note-taking that are more intuitive to you. Any judge that tells you, use this specific tracking method, wrong, don't listen to them. Your tracking method is the best one so long as you tested it. Through the best process. If you guys really, really want good tracking methods or some advice, then you're welcome to ask people, but yeah, Adam.
This isn't a question. I'm just upset that your example for a wrong way was writing in ketchup and not the actual example of Keegan Hamill judging a major's outbrand by writing his notes on a football.
Don't write your notes on football. I actually didn't know this. Sorry, Keegan, if you're watching this, but that was wrong. You shouldn't have done that. Secondly, anyone that tells you to never insert ever. Look, generally, the rule of thumb is to take the path of least intervention. And for those of you that don't know, to intervene in a call or to intervene in a deliberation is to provide either information or assumptions that that outwit the content of the debate. The issue is here is this means that you have to buy things like mechanisms or buy things like claims at face value. Notably, and I say this all the time, you're not an arbitrator. You're not just there to bash the information together and create a word smash out of it. You're an adjudicator. Your role is to make sure that you're assessing the information for the integrity that it is. So notably, it is fine if you think a piece of information hasn't reached its burden, or if you think that there are 2 pieces of information that haven't reached their burden, you are allowed to make an assessment as to what it is that you feel is more likely to, for example, reach that outcome, etc. So don't be terrified of intervening, because I think what happens a lot now is that judges are so terrified of being called insertionary that they overcorrect, so then they buy things at face value, etc. Be an adjudicator, don't be an arbitrator. Cool. Third thing, being down bad for weighing. Right. So it's not a requirement in any manual that you have to weigh your arguments to win. I do think a lot of the times it is more persuasive if you weigh your arguments to win. But notably, what did we talk about earlier? Everything is an argument. Weighing in and of itself is also an argument. This is to say that if a team just blurts out a metric and says it's important, doesn't say why it's important, it's probably not likely to be very persuasive in the debate and things like that. So it needs to be proven, and arguments don't necessarily need to be weighed to win. So for example, And the place where this becomes the biggest issue is opening government says A, B, C, and this leads to conclusion 1. Closing government says X, Y, Z, and instead of reaching conclusion 2, they also reach conclusion 1. So often here, like more mid-adjudicators might be like, well, closing needed to weigh their mechanisms against opening. And sometimes this might be true if those mechanisms X, Y, Z are literally as plausible, as broad stroke, and as good as the mechanisms provided in opening government. But you as an adjudicator are allowed to make an assessment on whether these mechanisms are just better, independent of weighing. It might be made more convincing by weighing. I'm just saying, don't defer to weighing is the reason as to why a team doesn't or does take it over another team. You might hear quite frequently the obligation to weigh. I think this exists insofar as teams reach very similar conclusions while not using similar, but like a similar rigor of analysis, then maybe yes, an obligation to weigh does exist. But don't be down bad for it. Like, consider other avenues as to how you can weigh this clash. Cool. The last thing is buying mechanisms at face value, and we'll do an exercise on this. So generally, people are pretty good at being skeptical of claims. So for example, a team in opening government says, based on this motion, we're going to make this argument. And obviously you don't buy the argument at face value. The issue with that is often really good speakers immediately after will be like, 7 mechanisms, blurt them out in 50 seconds, and then you're like, oh, okay, well the premises have been proven now, because they give 7 mechanisms. Sometimes these mechanisms are dog shit, and you need to assess whether each of these mechanisms are dog shit. This is kind of annoying because speakers speak really fast, and you need to have a mental note as to what these mechanisms are in the first place. But always think and defer back to the first principle that we were talking about. Is this a good or a bad reason to pass or fail the motion? Are they persuasive in the way that they do it? And I mean, are they allowed to do it? But they're probably allowed to do it. So ask yourself those first 2 questions. So don't just be interrogative of claims, but be interrogative of each mechanism that comes up. Because this is what I find to be the most frequent weakness of judges. Fantastic. We're going to go into an example then. Okay, so this is what I'm studying in history right now, so you guys are going to do this. This house regrets the association of the Rust Belt post-industrial closures to the Dust Bowl of the Great Depression by American media. The LO says this, gives 5 mechanisms. Talk amongst yourselves for 2 minutes, and then we'll feed back on these mechanisms. What do you think the premise has been proven? Which mechanisms do you think are good, if any of them are good at all? 2 minutes.
There's a Rust Belt happening at the moment.
No, this is from like the 80s.
Yeah, the industrial closures happened in the 1980s.
Yeah. So 3 and 5 contradict each other.
Yeah.
I think 4 is just bad.
I think 1's bad, but 2's okay.
Why do you think 1's bad? I actually don't know if that is something.
Because like, why do they have to be closed for them to feel nostalgic about?
I think I'm also just confused with the fact that they're displaced. Also, they're not seen.
Displays were
Yeah, I guess maybe.
I think I think that you feeling nostalgic about it, I think that's how it's basically for a second round, maybe I understand basically you get it's kind of confusing people understand
I think you need more.
so
I
maybe
everyone understands that the Great Depression was bad.
Yeah, I think it's
the format I do not understand why relating to something that helps you to achieve
No, this is from February 9th, 2012. I was cleaning up my drop back.
I'm sorry,
If you want to prove argument with something that just
What do you think? I like understand the theory of that I trade information.
Okay, let's reconvene. Right. Who would like to feed back first? I guess the question I'm going to ask is, do you think this premise has been proven? And then why? Who's first? Taylor.
I don't necessarily see how catharsis ties into a lot of the reasons. I guess one of them was about, like, it gives them legitimacy for not attempting to find work, but I don't see how that can lead to something cathartic.
Okay.
Maybe that's just me.
Nora?
Maybe this is a bit silly, but my first take is that we're not to assume all of these are proven, right? This is just the info that we have.
Just the info
Cool.
that you have, yeah.
Why do you feel nostalgic about working in your industrial plant? Like, that feels like actually something you might need to prove in order to prove all the other things that you say as well.
Yeah, I would agree. Anyone else got anything to say?
Two could be good, but it needs a because. The because can just be because everyone understands that the Great Depression is bad. But I just don't like, I think it needs a because. Otherwise, I think that is the strongest mechanism provided. I think that 3 and 5 are internally contradictory. I think that Nora's already pointed out the flaw in 1. And I think that 4 just doesn't actually tie back to the motion.
Yeah, I agree. Adam.
So when it comes to the contradiction, from what I understand as a judge, you should basically take them into account like the first claim, which I think that the first claim about legitimacy and analytical work. Firstly, I think that it's relatively again okay argument because it somehow links to catharsis, that you are able to remove yourself emotional from this when you think that what you are doing is legitimate. Plus, just the characterization that basically the characterization of rundown times also kind of like show that yes, I intuitively understand when this would give you some sort of like legitimacy.
Yeah, I will note that with contradictions, they're pretty devastating in debates because you only count the first claim, but you need to see if the contradictory claim impacts the persuasiveness of the first claim. So it could be very devastating to the first claim as well. But yeah, you're right. Adam.
I think that there are also issues in terms of relevance. I just think a lot of these actually have no link to the motion. So the first one, I actually don't know how this connects to the motion whatsoever. The second one, maybe it does, because maybe people know more about the Dust Bowl than what's happening right now, but I don't know why that would be true, so I just don't think that's proven at all. The third one, again, it's just contingent on the same issue as the second one. Like, I don't know why it is that people see this as more legitimate. They know and care more about the Great Depression. Fourth one, I actually think that the fourth one's like the most legit out of all of these, in that I think it at least tries to say, yeah, you can relate to what happened in the Dust Bowl. I just don't know why I care about it. And then the fifth one has the problems that have already been pointed out, as well as the fact that, again, I just actually don't know how this looks to the motion or why there's any tipping point for basically any of this. I just think that it's a collection of claims that are largely completely irrelevant to the debate.
Yeah, I think Adam's hit the nail on the head. I just don't think any of them are really linked to why people engage with the media about the Great Depression relating to the Rust Belt in these ways. But notably, I think you guys were all very good at pointing out issues with these mechanisms. The issue with this is to interrogatively look at these when, I don't know, a really, really good speaker or a really rappy speaker is in front of you and rattles them off in 45 seconds. Suddenly, everyone's like, he's clearly a truth. So make sure you're just being as interrogative as possible. You guys are clearly, everyone is clearly very capable of casting doubt onto each of these mechanisms. Because notably, I don't think any of you really, obviously it was to find the flaws in the mechanism. So you guys rebutted them a little bit. But a lot of them were just intrinsic things that adjudicators should be doing. Things like, is this related to the motion? Is this relevant? Is this proven? Does this matter? Things like that. So this isn't rebutting the premises. This is just assessing how good these mechanisms are. I think you guys did very well with that. Cool. Any questions at this stage? Fantastic. Let's rock and roll. Okay. Next section will be on being an excellent panelist. Hopefully for those of you that are paneling, this should be quite useful. So, why is being an excellent panelist hard? The first thing is panelist limbo. And so those of you that haven't judged a lot, what this is basically is, in the early stage of your judging career, CAs, so the chief adjudicators that are allocating the panels and the chairs, are often very reluctant to give someone who doesn't have a lot of chairing experience, or to give someone who's paneling even really well chairing experience at the competition, because they don't want to be the one that fucked up and gave someone that shouldn't be chairing a panel like chair experience. So this means, like, unfortunately, when you're in the beginning of your judging career, it's quite likely, even if you're doing very well, that you might be paneling a lot. This means that you have to panel really well a lot, which is kind of annoying because of all of these reasons why I don't know, it might be difficult. Yeah, the second thing is what I said at the start. So you don't have an OA, you don't have, unless you're Benjamin, you're not managing a panel and things like that. So you're just assessed on fewer things. You're basically only assessed on your ability to answer questions from the chair in a way which is good. And you can read the scale on this, but then you run into this issue, which is that chairs, low-key, don't read the scale, they just provide feedback. And it's really annoying, because like, they really should read the scale. And I asked the EUDC CAs this, and they were like, yeah, you're right, like, they really should. Because I asked them how to be an excellent panelist, they were like, we need to work on people using the scale. And I was like, you're right, but like, yeah, they don't. And oh yeah, like, yeah, it sucks if your name doesn't start with A. If you're from EUD and your name starts with A, you have a really good chance of being a really good judge. Fantastic. So hopefully some of this advice will help you break some of these. Notably, all the advice of things that you shouldn't do and the bad advice that you're now avoiding should also help you out with evading some of these things. Cool. So here's some do's. Firstly, answer the questions of the chair specifically. And what this means, and this is also unfortunate, is that you as a panelist will have a lot of reads on the debate, but the issue is that the chair has a map of how they want to take deliberation. Because for the chair, there's 15 minutes where they have to get a lot of things done. They need to hear out all the panelists, they need to do the ballot, they need to allocate speaks, and they need to come to ideally a consensus call, especially if they're a good chair and they view the deliberation as like a team and like aiming at consensus and things like that. So this means that like you'll be somewhat compromised to the extent to which you will get the deliberation that you want. And the thing is that a lot of chairs will view you as compromising the delib if you're too rambly, you're taking the deliberation in a lot of directions, etc. So when a chair asks you a question, just be very specific and answer that question. And if you want to go on more than this, for example, the chair asks you, why do you weigh opening opposition above opening government? You establish your margins, and then you say, I also have some comments on this, like you establish your margins, and then you're like, I also have a comment on the second thing that the DLO said, if you'd like me to talk about it. And then the chair can bookmark that kind of thing. I think what is inadvisable is just going off on rambles about what you think about the debate. I think answer the chair's question. If they're a good chair, they'll ask you a specific question, in which case you can answer a specific question. Sometimes they're more broad. Usually this is what they're asking for if they ask for a clash. The margin of the clash. So, do I have a whiteboard pen? I want to draw this. Okay. So.
No, Aymaan, do that one.
Huh?
Do that one.
I agree.
Oh yeah, I'll do this one. Okay, fun. Fantastic. So this is, so you and the chair disagree on top half, and you think opening opposition wins, and this is all the content from opening opposition. I think what some panelists suffer from is this opening government. They're like, oh, this wins, this also wins, this also wins, and this also wins, and this attacks that, and that, and that. And then it becomes very non-specific, and the chair has a really hard time dealing with this. The more advisable thing, if you're able to do this, is establish what the margin of the clash is. i.e., opening government engaged on this, opening opposition engaged on this, and this proves that, and that. And then you package deal it and put it together. And that's what they engage on. I know this is kind of hard sometimes, and sometimes teams don't engage with each other. And then this is the issue of speakers. It's true. This is the issue of speakers not being good enough. But try and establish what you think the margin between two teams is, as opposed to just barracking a bunch of things. I think this helps the roadmap of the chair. Again, unfortunately, you just won't have your way with deliberation. This is something panelists have to contend with. Use the language of the debate. This is some of the best feedback I've ever gotten about how to be a better judge. So this also applies to chairs, this applies to OAs, this applies to giving personal feedback to speakers. So when you're in your deliberation, use the language that occurred in the debate as opposed to paraphrasing what's happened. Because like you don't need to paraphrase, you can just use the language that happened in the debate and things like that. Yeah, think about that. Cool. Prompt things that you want to be talked about. So for example, in this example where you and the chair disagree on top half, you'll have a contention on top half, and you've now declared your margins to what you think the top half is. Then, what I think is highly advisable as a panelist is to say, what I think the issue on top half is, which makes me put opening opposition above opening government, is this. If this question can be answered in X and Y way, that means I'll have no other problems with putting opening government over opening opposition, so therefore I'll flip on this clash. Often this means that the chair is able to direct discussion in the way that they want to. This doesn't mean that immediately after your questions are answered, you need to flip on that clash, because you can still be unpersuaded by what the other panelists and what the chair says. But it at least directs the discussion to like a degree to which you're being more productive in it. So then you get better marks for being, like more succinct, like easier to manage, and having better justifications, etc. Because you can be very specific as to where you think it is that teams are doing it, teams are doing that stuff differently. Okay, here are some don'ts. This one is the main one, which is turn deliberation into a war of attrition. And this normally happens when panelists are trying to win deliberation. So I also call it never back down, never what judging. So I want to be very clear here. This doesn't mean that you just concede to your chair. So you and the chair disagree, or you and the entire panel disagrees. You have like reverse calls, right? It doesn't mean you just like coalesce everything that they say and just be persuaded for the sake of being persuaded. But like to the best of your ability, you're doing all the things that we talked about earlier. So you're making it easier for the deliberation to be directed. So what I mean by war of attrition is sometimes panelists do this thing where they're like, I think the margin of the clash is this. I'm like, okay, well, I can answer that by saying X and Y. And then they're like, okay, my question has been answered. So then I'm like, they're going to flip now, aren't they? And then they go, no, actually, there's A, B, and C as well. And they've clearly purposely withheld information so they could use it later to disagree with me. Just say it at the start. So then, because you guys aren't trying to win the deliberation, you're trying to be as productive as possible on the panel. So to be as productive as possible, do that at the start to the best of your ability. Again, I understand sometimes that debates are very complicated, and sometimes you actually do uncover a piece of information that could like teach a clash towards a certain way. In which case, don't be scared of war of attrition, but don't purposely war of attrition. It's really annoying. Like, I've given panelists really low marks for doing this, so don't do it. Fantastic. The second thing is overcorrection, and this isn't like, okay, sometimes you will overcorrect, and that's fine. Just be, don't overcorrect for overcorrecting either, but at least think about what you could be doing after advice. Because sometimes chairs will just be a bit pissed off because they got rolled or something, and you ask them for feedback, and they're like, make your justification shorter because you spoke for like a minute and 15 seconds. So you go to your next deliberation and you offer a 15-second justification when you actually needed to talk for a while. Take each deliberation circumstantially and take feedback holistically. So this is to say that if judges have a certain piece of feedback about broadly what you did wrong in that delib, then you need to cross-apply it not to the next deliberation, but to a deliberation that occurs quite similarly. So for example, in a deliberation where everyone had the same call and the delib was really clear, and the chair gives you feedback like that, then cross-apply that feedback to a similar style of delib that happens in the future, as opposed to the very next delib where you all have different calls and it's an entirely different deliberation. The thing is that you will act differently and you'll be different in different deliberations. So you need to act circumstantially based on this. It's also just unproductive to overcorrect, so try and think about what's most productive. Fantastic. We're next going to move on to crediting principles. Is there anything about paneling that people have questions on? Yes.
Just a comment, because I think we've noticed this. We talk about this quite frequently when we're chairing. But if your chair goes like, yeah, that's code for like, shut the fuck up and move on. Like, please do not talk, because chairs do not want to interrupt you.
Yeah, my assumption was that you guys, knowing the basics of judging, would hopefully know that. But if the chair does cut you off, please stop. Like, it won't be advantageous to you or the deliberation to carry on. Because, yeah. Any other questions? Fantastic. Yes, no questions. Okay, cool. Crediting principles. Why is this challenging? I think there are 4 reasons for this. Firstly, and the very obvious reason, is that a principle often offers a competing metric. And we'll talk about that as to what a principle is. The second thing is principles often operate under an umbrella strategy. So what I mean by an umbrella strategy is that a team running a principle in a room might try and compete their principle against all the other practical cases in the room. And rather than individually interact with their principle, they just go, and this comes broad stroke over everything in the debate because, it's a principle. The third thing is that they have different burdens of proof. I'm about to tell you why they don't have different burdens of proof, but there's often a perception that they have different burdens of proof. And the fourth thing is this widely shared moral intuitions thing. Let's talk about that. Widely shared moral intuitions and why this is difficult. This is a quote from the EUDC manual. These are all different things that count as analysis. Empirical evidence, fine, you guys all know this. Mechanistic links, structural reasons, you guys all know this. Damaging logical implication of a rebuttal, you guys know this. Emotive response that encourages us to care about a certain outcome, not that important for this one. But this is the style thing, right? So if you're able to convey a morally significant thing out of something that isn't mechanistic in nature, that's also fine as analysis. But this one, identifying widely shared moral intuitions in favor of an argument, can get pretty messy in panels. And the very trivial reason for this is that people have different moral intuitions, and it's very difficult to have as widely shared moral intuitions as maybe BP debating would like. So the way this often manifests is in a debate, a team will give an intuition pump, and then it just becomes whether your intuition is pumped by that intuition. And sometimes your intuition is not pumped, and that's fine. And sometimes your intuition is pumped, and that's fine. Look, I think the main things with this is just to be honest on your panel. Maybe you have a team literally fourth and the other panelists have a team first because they buy their one intuition pump. Because if it doesn't pump your intuition, just say, look, maybe it is a widely shared moral intuition. I personally either I don't subscribe to that intuition or something like, I think that intuition is unpersuasive compared to the other arguments in the debate that are more persuasive for X, Y, Z reasons. I think the second thing, and this is more important maybe, is it persuasive, obviously, is what you're asking all the time. But I think you ought to ask yourself how much more deductive a speaker can be. Because often, speakers are giving intuition pumps because there's kind of not much other analysis they can give. So the best example of this that I see very frequently is when speakers run a self-defense principle. And often they just analogize this and intuition pump this by giving examples in which we allow things like self-defense. And notably, speakers often have a much harder time justifying mechanistically why self-defense is something that is morally acceptable, but rather are better able to do this via intuition pumps. Notably here, I think in order to be as, not charitable as a judge, but in order to be able to co-opt this other avenue of analysis, which is valid analysis, you maybe want to ask yourself that if this moral intuition is widely shared, and the speaker can't be any more deductive on this claim, and I understand that this moral intuition does exist, then maybe it is creditable in some spheres. So this is a question that you can ask yourself. But to be honest, if you're not persuaded by it, you're not persuaded by it, and that's fine. Just be open about it. Cool. Let's go on to burdens of proof on principles. Right. So the first thing is what a principle actually is. I'm going to try and Yes.
Can I ask you, is there some sort of tier list of things you can do to convince a judge? Or how would you compare, for example, a moral intuition against some banger analysis if you're really convinced by this moral intuition as well?
Yeah, so I think the first thing you need to do is just compare its persuasiveness as you would with any other persuasiveness. So for example, if someone provides you with a widely shared moral intuition and you're the first thing you have to do is just say that I'm persuaded by this insofar as this does exist and the average voter does know this thing exists. The second thing is then to say that I think it is more persuasive than banger mechanistic analysis insofar as whatever it does to that analysis. Yeah. So does that make that analysis more speculative? Is that intuition pump less speculative than other mechanistic analysis? Does it undercut it? That will be circumstantial. But I think the broad thing here is just to be honest and use your metrics in the way that you know. The example for me is in the Trinity Open semi-final. The closing government just ran a bunch of intuition pumps, and myself and one of the other panelists were just this is fire, I love this. And then one of the panelists was this shit makes no sense. And that's completely fine, it's just, we're persuaded by this, and it's valid reason to be persuaded. Yeah. I don't think there's a tier list, if that's the question. Things are persuasive in spheres for different reasons. Again, debates are just circumstantial. Okay, so what a principle is, and I'll try and deconstruct this a little bit for judges, is generally in BP debating, it's a way to assess a certain outcome based on non-utilitarian metrics So you provide some other metric by which this should be analysed as opposed to just utility. And generally what this involves is proving the metric and then proving your assessment of the outcome. So you prove the metric first and then the assessment is proven. Notably, and again, I think we tend to break this down at a more beginner or intermediate level just so people understand, that principles are valid individually and are not alien to other arguments. But they're not necessarily non-practical. And this is the thing, because teams will often run practical arguments and then weigh them or use principles to justify why this is an action that is good or harmful, as opposed to using utility. This means that the persuasiveness of the principle in and of itself can be tied to other burdens of proof that you normally just apply to other things. So when it comes to assessing principles, don't be panicked, because they're not really that different. I'm about to prove that. Cool. Normal burdens, right? So these are the normal burdens that you're looking for in any case, right? You're looking for proof, i.e., is this true? Delta, does the motion change this? And tipping point is the thing in the thing that's the thing, right? Let's go into principle burdens. They look really similar. Legitimacy, which is just proof. Extendability, does this thing extend to the motion? And critical point, at what point is this principle met? Seems quite similar to me. So these just things you're looking for. Again, is this true? What changed under the motion that necessitates this principle? And then at what point is this principle met? I think the best way we're going to go over this is just looking at some examples in how principles are analysed. But notably, you are just looking for these things, and you're just looking to the extent to which each of these burdens are met. And notably, as with any other analysis, so for example, with a practical claim, for example, if they've proven their frame and they've reached a tipping point, you might credit it to some extent, but if they don't show how the motion extensively changes it, then maybe it's somewhat less creditable, but you would still credit it to some extent. I think the biggest thing that judges fall into is that principles fall from one of these, so then the principle is no longer valid. There's absolutely nothing you can credit them on. But that's not true, right? There can still be justifications within that principle that you're convinced by. That means that the principle doesn't reach its absolute critical point, or the principle doesn't reach its absolute plausibility, but it's still tied somewhat to the outcome that the team is trying to prove, and therefore the principle is still somewhat valuable. So no automatic firsts for principles, no automatic fourths for principles. Please be as holistic as you can with principles as would be with any other argument. I think the main reason that judges automatically first or fourth principles is just because they're scared. You guys are not scared. I know this. Fantastic. Let's move into some examples. So there's 4 examples. I just want you guys to have a look at legitimacy, extendability, and critical point, and just criticize and or say what is done well within these principles. So the first motion is this house believes that teachers should have access to students doing homework for an hour a day. Yeah, 2 minutes, and then we can move on this one. Yeah, this one is, yeah.
I don't really understand the analogy, because I feel like if you don't do it, then you're not being, if you don't do your homework, then you're not suffering the occasion which you understand if you do your homework.
That's true.
Well,
Yeah, so I think they need to discuss
I think they do. We generally agree that professionals are students in private spaces.
Oh, I'm generally oh, fair.
Yeah. So because of that, then it's but I just don't think it's like that.
So you're thinking I don't think that I think that this notion is not actually done bad shit.
Well, because if the claim is that this is proactive for not doing homework.
Okay, let's agree. Does anyone have any comments on this? Anything that the principal does well? And full short, Nora.
First comment, that's not the principle of privacy that they've written just there, I don't think. But I do think there's an issue with whether or not, and Cyrus and I really disagree on this, whether or not the thing they have proven, or the thing they do say, which is about punishing the student, is true at all. It's unclear whether this is a punishment.
I agree.
I actually think they do sort of prove, comparatively prove, you'd have to see the rest of the debate, but somewhat prove the principle of privacy. We generally agree that people should not have professional jurisdiction over private spaces. I think this is a broadly shared intuition. I think that if this is true, then I see why this is a violation of that, because you have professional jurisdiction over a private space. And if that's true, I could see that being a punishment. My problem is I think the logic chain doesn't work. I think if the teacher's only punishing the children who do the homework instead of ever punishing the people who don't do the homework because they don't get their privacy infringed upon, which causes a weird chicken and the egg problem.
I agree. The extendability of this is weird. So on this last one, who wants to reject that this is a widely shared moral intuition? Don't be scared. You can reject it. That's fine.
What is an intuition exactly? The principle of privacy or the punishment thing?
That we generally agree that we shouldn't punish actions that haven't happened yet. We generally agree that people shouldn't have professional jurisdiction over private spaces. Do you think this is a widely shared moral intuition?
Regarding the jurisdiction, I don't think so, because don't think so. Typically, we probably agree that teachers should, be looking into, cyberbullying or something like that between their pupils. That is also jurisdiction over private space, and probably there are many other similar instances. Regarding the first one, we do not necessarily. We probably agree that not punishment, but we can also frame punishment as being basically doing some sort of prevention, for example, prevention. For example, having some sort of monitoring somewhere so that they prevent any action, and then this is again something that people agree that could happen.
Yeah, I will note that obviously, I think Eli hit the nail on the head, which is we'd have to see the rest of the debate for this, because a lot of the criticism was just rebutting the principle, which as a judge you probably shouldn't do. But yeah, Rupert, do you have your hand up?
You go first.
Yeah, Leander. I'll take you, Leander, and then move on to the next example. I'll take you next time. That's my promise.
Right, no, this is just a short thing, and I think my only contention with this is pretty broadly, it's a thing where conspiracy to commit a crime, for example, is punished under law, so we are willing to punish people for things they haven't done yet, if we think there's sufficient intention, for example.
Good rebuttal. I wish you were in that debate. Fantastic. It's the same motion, different principle. We'll talk about it. I'll go down so I'm here for the third motion. You can say it.
There's some sort of burden, so they already agreed it's common intuition. It's fine to just try and take it. So they have to explain why it's important to
Okay, fantastic. Let's reconvene. Anyone have comments on this principle? Just.
We were just talking about how they already acknowledged that there is a capacity to restrict children's agency, and so it's somewhat unclear why this is specifically the tipping point, especially because the justification that they do give this invades their rooms, their private spaces, but presumably parents do this all the time for all sorts of shit. If they think that their kid is hiding drugs in the room or something, they would invade it. So obviously you could imagine reasons why this would be true, but I think it needs a bit more rigor or analysis to demonstrate that.
Any other comments? Ruby.
The critical point they pointed out being their rooms is kind of funny because A is probably not revealing rooms for every single person, but also B, parents probably do go into rooms and limit agency in this way as well. So
I think the critical point is something.
I think this is really interesting in that I think it actually points out a flaw with the principle we tend to credit quite freely, because I think that people are, well, at least my group had like a point on like, they don't prove why you need this minimal agency at all. But I think if you change all of these words to state power principle, and you say the state has a monopoly of violence, so therefore you should be allowed to maximize your agency since they've taken this agency away from you, everyone's like, yeah, that's fine, I'm willing to credit that.
I agree. That's fantastic. Rupert.
It doesn't explain why specifically the camera access is the biggest issue for them in the agency. You force them to go to school, some parents force them to do certain things. So it's saying one point without saying that that is the most important issue for minimum agency.
Adam, last one.
It's unclear how camera access actually affects the decisions that they're making. Because the whole point here is agency and your ability to use that to make your decisions. But as Nora pointed out, you probably have to do the homework either way or you get punished. Because like you get punished for not doing homework. And so then it says even if it is the manner in which they do their homework. So what they would need to do is link in how the manner in which they do their homework and their choice over that is affected by the camera access, and specifically why camera access affects that, but just the teacher checking the homework afterwards doesn't. And without that link, they've not proven anything, really.
I agree. So I think you guys are clearly very good at being interrogative with principles. Again, obviously what Eli said last time, in the context of a debate, you would have to assess all this. Because maybe this analysis could first, in spite of all your criticisms, but at least you're able to find out like where this would position and in the context of certain responses. So this is hopefully defeating the first principles thing. Right. Third motion. Sorry for that. This I think the European Football League should require teams to include a minimum of 5 domestic players in their starting lineup. Assess this principle.
Is this the hat?
This is what we run.
This is the hat.
It is the hat man. It's the famous quarterfinal.
See if you can read it.
It's all, you know what, it's half.
This is best.
Alright, let's talk about this principle. Anyone have thoughts? Taylor.
I think my issue is that you probably have a range of like narratives in your community for like different hobbies. I don't think surely there's not a community that solely focuses on football. I mean, I'm sure it applies to some. I'm sure it applies to some, but I don't know if it's.
I'm not sure why this means that football leagues have an obligation. I also don't know why it's a reparative duty.
Yep, I agree. Nora.
I don't understand how this links to the motion. They're talking a lot about football fans, but I don't understand at all based on anything they've said as to how a minimum of 5 domestic players on the team, on the starting lineup is going to help at all.
They're missing the xenophobia link.
I will note that often in principles, the critical point that teams try to meet is not that specifically 5 players should be good, but rather this principle should be maximized in whatever context that it exists. So let's assume that this runner, this member of government, has said that this principle should be maximized in whatever context in which it should exist. What are some other criticisms you could make? Eli?
The xenophobia link. I just don't know why domestic players create a reparative.
Cyrus, last one.
This isn't really a criticism because I find that my generally held moral intuition is quite close to at least the principle as it's been legitimized here. I think obviously this part isn't including the extendability and the tipping point part of it. But as far as the legitimacy part of it, I think at least to some extent, this feels reason enough to credit it. As in, I see the reparative duty as because they benefit from them asymmetrically, you should give them something back.
So that would be lovely on a panel. If you do see it the other way, then yes, and that is a good way to express it. Right. Last principle. This house believes that having children is morally legitimate. This is the God of bias test.
Is this the CG of the Trinity sentence?
This sounds
Yeah. Such a good for this one.
Legitimate form of self-defense.
Pardon?
This is kind of fire.
Oh, shit.
I don't think I like debate anymore.
Burdens. They have a few burdens they need to fill.
This is such a session who are coding.
Intuition is insane.
This is so severe.
It's reasonable.
I think proportionate response.
Okay, I hear echoes that people think this is silly, and other echoes that people think this is fire. Who's a fire?
But I've just got an important question to ask about judging of this. Because I feel like what happens is sometimes you have a principle that like it doesn't work and you know why it doesn't work, but like no one actually says anything about it. Is it like fine? Like how do you credit that?
Well, it depends how it's analysed, right? Because what we were talking about earlier before you came, is that there's a line in the EUDC Judge Manual that says that analysis can also just be widely shared moral intuitions, which is just intuition pumps. So then the stupid thing that happens on panels is some panelists are like, this is not an intuition I have, so there's fourths. And then other panelists are like, well, this is an intuition I do have, so there's firsts. So the thing you need to be here on panels is just be very honest, and you're like, I think this doesn't work because this is not an intuition I have, if it is an intuition pump that you're talking about. If it is a mechanism that you're talking about, then don't rebut the mechanism, that's not how you judge. But like, if you think it is speculative, then raise why you think it is. Yeah, Cyrus.
On the legitimacy part of it, I gather, works fine. On the extendability, I'm unclear what the defense part of the self-defense is, as in what are you defending against? Who is the person trying to snatch your wallet?
Suffering.
These are all things you're defending against, Cyrus.
Wait, but those aren't like, as in, if growing old and becoming frail and dying were happening to me, and it wasn't because of somebody, there is no self-defense to be had, that's just like a bad thing that's happening to me.
That would have been a really good response this year. Anyway.
Well, we don't allow people to steal as self-defense from hunger. So I feel like self-defense doesn't just work in like broad, things that might happen to you. But it's actually the end part that's the problem, where it's like state resources are speculative and children are constant.
Yeah.
Because children are not constant, because children can die as well. Children can not like you. Children, like, I don't know, there's so many things. The children might be really unsuccessful or like bad carers. So.
I definitely agree. I think that's the most speculative part of the principle. I'll go to Dom and then Adam and then Leander. No,
yeah, I don't agree with the headline because having children is a collaborative endeavour, so we can't apply the principle of self-defense. If someone else is being attacked, like if you punch someone else for them, that's not self-defense.
Yes. Very frequently, I think it is. I actually think that we think it's completely fine if your girlfriend is being beat up right next to you for you to punch the guy. But we do say it is. Like, that's the legal term.
We would principally say it's self-defense, like maybe...
Maybe it's the wording of the motion, but I'm unclear on why you have to have the children, why you can't, for example, adopt the children. So even if we take them at their best, this is not exclusive benefit.
That's actually easy. Adam, last one.
Yeah, the other thing is that I think even if the intuition pump is intuitive, which there was debate about, I don't actually know why it's analogous to the motion. So the problem with the intuition pump is they're trying to say even a disproportionate response can be fine. But like, there's an extent to which that is disproportionate. And then there could be other things that are more disproportionate. So if like a country sends one scout or spy into your country and then you like nuke back all their cities, right? And so the problem is the intuition here and the analogy they're trying to make is we can do a thing that's disproportionate here, so we should be able to do it here as well. But it's unclear how disproportionate it should be to be legitimate and whether or not this is still that disproportionate. So what you need to do to prove this is then have a bunch of utilitarian stuff to prove exactly how disproportionate the harm versus the benefit is. And then this principle slightly shifts that margin, where if it's disproportionate enough, you can still win. So it's not just about utility, but it just shifts the margin of the debate slightly. And you're still going to have to fall back on all that utility stuff to prove how disproportionate it is, and that it's not too disproportionate, and it fits with your slightly vague intuition pump and not with the new thing instead.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think what you guys have done really well in the course of these 4 examples is you've been interrogative of the principles, not in a way where you're like, this bit is missing, so the entire principle fails, but you're like, this is a legit critique of the principle that another team might have rebutted, or just makes the principle more speculative. But notably, you've assessed them just like you would assess any other claim in debating, any other practical claim, which means that you're better able to place principles in a debate. Because again, they don't just first or fourth. They might do sometimes, but most of the time, just assess them how you'd assess any other argument. That is the end of the workshop, and I'm going to run the draw in a second. Does anyone have any last questions?
Do you have an example, because I still find it difficult to credit principles at all, of a principle that's good, just good, just like the whole thing works and it's good?
the principal that I ran in round 5 of Western IB.
There's also the
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll speak to you.
What are the cases in which like a principal beats out one practical case and not the other, given that everything's fully proven?
Jack, you'll go to CG. EUDC did for 2022 finals.
Actually, sure, I'll watch it, whatever.
They seconded me also.
Yeah,
I know,
the
only
Cambridge IB final is also like that.
Which year?
2022, where I think opening government still beats teams on.
Oh, that was the
Yeah.
transhumanism one.
No, that was Iran, Sharia, eye for an eye.
Because like the only thing I can think of is like LSE Open, but like, you know.
So I think
that doesn't
there's a couple of cases. So firstly, one team on a bench proves practical, other team on the bench proves principle. Notably, the team that's proven principle has probably also proven something practical. Anyway, and both teams on op don't meet their burdens. That means the CG team might not take it over OG, but could take it over both op teams. And the other thing is when like a specific team has done particularly badly or particularly well, so they've cleared the debate, in which case often principals then slot into other places. Where debates are really, really close, and this happened to me round 4 of Trinity Open, is opening government ran a really, really good practical claim. Closing opposition ran a really, really good principal claim. And the short diagonal were also excellent, ended up being a long diagonal debate. I think what happens in these cases is a principal might nullify and or like interact with content from other teams in such a way which a certain team is insulated from because of some framing they've done or how they've established their metric, but other teams are not insulated to that. So then that often means that principals can place like second or third. Like I think this can happen very easily. Any other questions? Silas?
I've had experience running principals, particularly in really strong rooms. One sad semi-final comes to mind. Where I run it and it is reasonably ticks all those boxes of legitimacy and extendability and tipping point. But then it's like, the panel health was like slightly off flash or whatever else, and that kind of, and I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So how do you? This is not a judging question.
This isn't a judging question. My comment is that the judges are bad.
But they probably weren't bad judges. It's like, I don't know.
No, there's a lot of really
Which one
bad
is
judges
this?
that are really messy.
So
Because the list is so long.